APUS government students, here we go. Lecture 7.2. We are nearing the finish line. Only a few more lectures left in the semester. So we're looking at a number of different things today. And you may say to yourself, gosh, this is like super boring stuff. But this is stuff that's certainly going to impact you. A good number of you out there are planning on going to college in the next few years. These decisions are going to be made here by whether it be our chairman of the Federal Reserve, decisions made by Congress, decisions made by our president. These are going to impact you for the rest of your life. You know, the cost of college is not cheap, and many of you are going to have to borrow money for college if you choose to go that route. So there's a number of different things here that I think that are important for us to understand here, in addition to some other things we'll look at with polls and some other fun things. So you can go ahead and begin to get these notes down here with Mr. Wood. As you're looking at the two things here, this is important for us to just make sure we understand the basics of the differences. In a nutshell, fiscal policy. Think about the implications of the taxation that our Congress decides upon and the spending that our Congress decides upon, all right? One of the issues with changing fiscal policy is that its impact can be delayed. What do you mean by that? Well, you know, we had our current president pass a vast fiscal policy change, cut taxes for us and corporations. But you see that you have to do that in time for the election to really see the implications of that. So you want to do that at least a year or two before the election. And our president would say, had COVID not happened, you would have seen this massive, great, wonderful explosion of great wealth within our country with the fiscal policy changes that he helped to implement with Congress way back in 2017, 2018. All right? So it has to deal with the amount of money that's coming in and going out within our government. Now, obviously, Congress is in control of that, but the president has a big, big push within that. Let's contrast that with the right-hand side now. Now, monetary policy is different, right? This has a lot more, yes, the government oversees it to a certain extent, but we've really kind of made this its own, certainly independent kind of entity that's out there. These Federal Reserve leaders serve for a specific period of time. They try to not be political. At least they would say they are not political. But certainly you can see that they're like anybody else. They're going to be pressured by politicians, by presidents, in terms of what they do. So what's the difference in what these folks do on the right-hand side? They control the flow of money. They control the flow of money. Make more money, put more money out there. Make less money, get less money out there. And what they're trying to do is walk this tightrope walk of targeting inflation. As you can imagine, put too much money out there, it's not worth as much. Inflation. Not put enough money out there for folks to be able to have and borrow, and interest rates are so high that nobody wants to buy a car or go to college or buy a house. So it's this consistent back and forth within these folks doing this. All right? So I'm going to pause it right here for a second, and I want you to then look at the bottom of page 116. So I'm giving you a real-world example there on the bottom of 116. All right, so you can read that there. I pulled that right from the Republican platform. This has been a thing where Republicans and conservatives have always wanted more transparency of the right-hand side. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that, Federal Reserve folks? All right? So as you look at A, what's the best tool available to provide transparency and accountability? So think about that for a second. Maybe you want to pause there, Mr. Wood. I mean, I think to a certain extent your answer is having Congress having control over these people. We talk about accountability, transparency. It's probably Congress that's going to be doing that. I think for B, the answer is, if you want to pause it there and talk about that, Mr. Wood, you can do that now. I think your answer is certainly yes. They come under pressure. Absolutely, they're human beings. All right, let's take a look at the third one there. Brainstorm some ideas Democrats may counter with to provide this upward mobility and equitable prosperity. These ideas need not be based in the Federal Reserve, so you can pause it here, Mr. Wood. I think kind of a tough answer. I think I was kind of shooting for the fences here for you guys to realize this. But I mean, certainly I think Democrats can counter with, the Federal Reserve does a great job. We don't need more accountability of them. They've never been the problem, Democrats could argue. In terms of monetary policy, it's been more fiscal policy issues that have created problems within our country when we've had them. At least that's what I think Democrats would probably say. All right, let's move on. Let's take a look here on page 117. Go ahead and get that down there. So now we're shifting gears and looking at how people tend to vote. So I didn't have the 2020 information for you, so I pulled the 2016 stuff. But as you can see, now we're diving into demographics and how people vote. And the more educated people are, the more they seem to vote more liberally. And you can see that there when you look at about halfway down the chart. Look at high school or less versus post-grad and how they voted for Hillary Clinton. I would imagine you'd see much of the same for Joe Biden. What's interesting, though, is if we look at A versus B, you think to yourself, okay, more education, making more money. Okay, I get it. They vote more liberally. They're going to make more money. Shouldn't economic status equate to them voting more liberally too? And the answer is no. The answer is no. Now, I think there's something to be said here too, is if you look at what's happened traditionally with Republicans, in just the last couple of years, our president gave a tax break to a number of our top earners and corporations within our country. And you can argue whether that was a good thing or a bad thing, but that probably is what feeds into what you see there for B. All right, take a look at C. And gosh, I know our book talks about, our Jewish community being more liberal voters. Gosh, I'd like to see what happened in 2016 and 2020 in terms of how they felt with our current president. May have turned to have them vote more conservatively. I guess I don't have information on that for you, but that's your trends. The thing that you can look at there, look at white evangelical Protestants, look at how they continued to turn out for Trump. I'd imagine that you would see the same numbers for 2020, kind of one of his core blocks, one of his core voting blocks for him. The more religious someone is, especially among whites, not necessarily African Americans, but among whites, the more apt they are to vote for Donald Trump. Race, that's not going to surprise you there. With the exception of Cuban Americans who vote conservatively, most of them vote more liberally. Take a look here, gender and geography. Big issues with the gender gap. And these are things that if you're Republican, excuse me, you're Republican, how do I identify with women? How do I identify with women? In 2008, when you guys were little kids, John McCain tried to do that by having a vice presidential running mate who was a female, Sarah Palin. It didn't work out for him in 2008, but that's been an issue. And it's a growing issue for Republicans. How do they identify with women who tend to, more often than not, vote for Democrats and liberal candidates? Flip side, if I'm a Democrat, how do I identify with men? I mean, that was one of Joe Biden's things. How do I identify with the white guy that's sitting in Michigan or Pennsylvania that loved Trump in 2016? All right, so that was one of his big issues. Geography, that's not going to surprise you there. You guys see that. You guys saw that last week. Nothing to surprise you there. Measuring public opinion. This is a group of people that have been under fire the last 5 or so years, all right? Because there's been a good argument that a lot of the things that they've been doing Their accuracy is really, it's not been really good. It's really not been really good. Traditionally, when pollsters do public opinions, they want to do a sample. And to do a type 1 sample, you can see that's the most accurate. They want random samples. They want random samples. So even if there's 12% of African Americans in the United States, even if they have, let's say, maybe 7% in their sample, they still say that's better in the green versus what you see down in the purple. The purple, the quota would be, hey, we need 50% men, 50% women. We need the exact proportions of Hispanics and African Americans in our sample. Though that would seem to make sense to us in our minds, they say type 1 is more accurate. And here's their problem. They haven't been very accurate the last 4 or 5 years. And you can see some of the problems in terms of their coverage. Landlines are down. How many of you have a landline at home? How many of you would pick up, or your parents would pick up, if you don't know who's calling? So this has led to what has been more and more of these polls that, man, they're off by more than just the 2 or 3, 4% that they say that they are. The key to this, know that sampling is random, and that's your answer there to the bottom of page 25B, random samples. All right, let's move on to page 118. This is showing you here breaking down polling data. This is kind of an older one, but basically what I want you guys to get from this is that as we look at polls that are out there, Gallup, Fox News, whatever you have, you can see their samples. So you can focus on that. Likely voters, registered voters, adults, they usually shoot for random samples of about 1,500. You can see during this time period, there was pretty strong opposition to Obamacare. What would or should a senator care most about? I mean, you would think that they would care most about samples that are likely voters. Those are the people that, likely voters are going to come out and vote for you. All right, last slide here. Then you've got one more thing to do with Mr. Wood, political trust. And this is one. I don't care if you're a liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat. This is one that we have to find a way to heal. And my hope is that your generation and my generation can begin to heal this political trust, because it's really eroded in a lot of different institutions. All right. So look at your congressional approval rating. Terrible. Presidential honeymoons. Look at Obama when he was elected, almost 70%. Look at when he was 40 months in, he dropped 20 points. You make tough decisions. You alienate people, and it's a tough job. It's a tough job. Joe Biden's in for a tough job. He's in for a tough job. So that political trust, how do you gain? How do you sustain it? How do you increase it? That's going to be interesting for us to watch in the coming years. Trust the media. It's a big one too. You really see this distrust in the media. So we'll have a whole issue where you and I will take a look at with Mr. Wood. How do we find good sources within the media? How can we trust stuff that's in the media? Because there's a lot of great people in the media that do great and wonderful things. That said, there's a lot of misleading media that's out there too. Okay? All right, I want you then to turn finally to page 119, and I'm going to finish up the lecture here, Mr. Wood, but I think this would be a great opportunity for the students to get into their squads and take a look at page 119. Take a look at what they see there in terms of public trust. And let's imagine for a second, whether you like Joe Biden or not, he's going to be the president of the United States in a couple months. Think about 3 things that you and your squad can think about if you were advisors to our new incoming president. How could you help him? How could you help him restore that public trust that has seemingly eroded within our country across a number of institutions? Lots of different things that you guys can brainstorm and talk about. Look forward to some notes from Mr. Wood about what it is that you guys and gals come up with. All right? That's it. I'll see you soon, everyone.